Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating and, I gotta say, pretty provocative communication theory. It comes from a workbook by Joseph Ng called The Gospel Reboot Camp, and it really pushes back on some common ideas about how we share a message. So let's get into this concept of discourse sequencing and see why the author thinks it's such a game changer.
So the whole argument, the entire book, really boils down to this one question. Is it possible that in our rush to get the whole message out, we're actually losing the most important parts? The author basically asks, what if we're getting the order of operations completely backward?
And look, he does not mince words. He uses these, well, pretty unforgettable medical metaphors to frame the problem. He sees it as a lack of control, just saying way too much, way too fast, without any thought to the right sequence. His solution? A kind of spiritual discipline for how we speak.
So, to fix this problem, he proposes this idea of a reboot camp. And the core training exercise in this camp is a principle he calls discourse sequencing. It is all about the specific, deliberate order in which you present ideas. Okay, so what is it exactly? It's not just about what you say, but, and this is the key, it's about when you say it. The real secret sauce here is the idea of intentionally withholding information, saving it for a later stage when it'll actually make sense. This is the central idea of the entire theory.
Now, to build his case, the author goes back to the Bible and says, hey, this principle is modeled right there. He says there are two totally different audiences, and, get this, each one got a very different initial message. It was never a one-size-fits-all approach.
And check out this contrast. On one hand, when speaking to a Jewish audience, the apostles could just assume a ton of shared knowledge, right? They all knew the scriptures, the history, the prophecies, so the message was all about fulfillment. But for everyone else, the regular folk, they had to start at absolute zero. They needed a completely different on-ramp.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The workbook zooms in on that second group, the outsiders, the people with zero religious context. What was the absolute first thing they were told?
Well, according to the source material, if you actually analyze the examples in the books of Acts and Revelation, this clear pattern pops up every time. The first message always had these points. 1, there's a creator God who made everything. 2, he's the one keeping you alive. 3, a day of judgment is on its way. 4, the proof of that judgment is that the judge he appointed was resurrected. And 5, the call to action. Turn away from your fake gods and fear the real one.
So that's what's in the message. Seems pretty straightforward. But honestly, the most radical, the most counterintuitive part of this whole argument isn't what was said. It's what was left out on purpose.
And this is the slide that just blows your mind. According to the author's analysis, that first message had no mention of Jesus by name, no mention of love, no heaven or hell, no forgiveness, no grace, no salvation. None of the things we often lead with today were in that first contact message. So the big question is, why? What gives?
Right. If you leave out all the key ingredients, what happens next? How do you ever get to the rest of the story? Well, to explain this, the author uses this fantastic analogy from, of all places, the kitchen.
He talks about making sweet and sour chicken. And he points out, you can have all the right ingredients, right? The chicken, the sauce, the pineapple. But if you just dump them all in a bowl and stick it in the microwave, you get this soggy, disgusting mess. The procedure, the order of operations, is everything.
You see, the crucial step you missed is what chefs call the Maillard reaction. It's that chemical process of browning that creates crispiness and all that deep, amazing flavor. You know, it's what makes fried chicken crispy instead of soggy. Without that specific reaction, the dish is a total failure, even if you have perfect ingredients. It's a necessary transformation.
So then the author makes the jump. He says there's a spiritual equivalent to this chemical reaction, and he calls it fear. Now, he's quick to point out he doesn't mean terror. He means a spirit-induced conviction, a healthy, profound awe and fear of the coming judgment he mentioned earlier. That reaction in someone's heart is what makes them ready for the next set of ingredients. This idea of a necessary reaction is basically the key that unlocks the author's entire 4-stage roadmap for communication. So let's see how all these pieces finally fit together. Okay, so here's the full sequence. First, you have the kerygma, that initial proclamation. If a divine work happens, it produces that Maillard reaction of fear or conviction. Only then does the person move to stage 2, catechesis, which is instruction on the fundamentals, and that leads to baptism. From there, you get didache, which means teaching,
First milk for the new believers, and eventually solid food for the mature, which prepares them for the end, the eschaton. See how it works? Each new stage of information is unlocked by the response to the previous one. What this all adds up to is a really fundamental shift in philosophy. The author contrasts what he calls human persuasion, using marketing tricks, trying to win friends and influence people, with divine conviction. That second approach is all about just faithfully delivering the right message in the right order, and then stepping back and trusting that a divine power will create that necessary reaction in someone's heart.
All right, so let's just boil it all down. What are the big takeaways here? First, the core argument is that the sequence is everything. Second, the author proposes that the very first message to an outsider should focus on God as creator and judge. Third, all those other big topics, love, salvation, you name it, they're intentionally saved for later, after that spiritual reaction of conviction happens. And finally, the whole model chooses to rely on divine conviction instead of human persuasion.
And that really leaves us with a big final question to chew on, doesn't it? Forget evangelism for a second. Think about marketing, teaching, or just having a conversation with a friend. How much does the order in which you present your ideas fundamentally change the message itself? It's a really powerful thought.